You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible.
Today, civil rights leaders called on the U.S. House of Representatives to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, a critical step to holding law enforcement accountable for unconstitutional and unethical conduct. Now, leaders from the NAACP, National Urban League, National Action Network, and several other groups spoke during a media briefing earlier today. Take a look.
The video of the killing of George Floyd held a mirror up to a truth about the American legal system. It showed us in the most stark and irrefutable way that there are deep, fundamental problems with how this country allows law enforcement to intimidate, abuse, torture, and kill unarmed Black people. We rightly focus on the pain and suffering of George Floyd when we see that video. But we must also focus on what we can see in the officer who killed George Floyd. Because Officer Derek Chauvin in that video, for most of it, is looking directly at us. He is ignoring the pleas of a Black man dying, calling for help and for his mother. His hands are in his pockets. He knows he's being filmed, and he looks directly at the camera because he has no fear. He has no fear that anything will happen to him, that there will be any accountability for his actions. If Congress fails to act to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, it will prove Officer Derek Chauvin right. It will reinforce that in encounters with Black people, law enforcement officers are above the law. When Officer Chauvin looks into the camera as he kills George Floyd, he is looking at us. He is daring us to prove him wrong. And we're calling on Congress to prove him wrong and move forward the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act.
For many of us, the searing pain on display in Minneapolis and across the country last summer has not gone away. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, Tony McDade, and so many others who have lost their lives to state violence deserve more. In their honor, we are here today demanding bold action. Today, we are nearing the end of Black History Month and approaching the one-year anniversaries of the police violence that led to nationwide protests last year, and still, no major legislation has been signed into law to address police violence against the Black community. This year must be different. We are pleased that House leadership intends to hold a vote on the Justice and Policing Act next week to recognize the urgency of this matter. The civil rights community urges members of the House to support passage of this bill and for Senate leadership to take it up in short order and build upon it.
Congress, it's just time to act. You must understand and remember the urgency and why we need the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed now. Our Black Women's Roundtable and Essence 2020 poll and our Unity 2020 election poll revealed that criminal justice and policing reform were one of the top 3 issues that Black voters voted about, especially Black women and our young people, that we wanted the president and this Congress to address. It's no coincidence the poll also showed the eradication of systemic racism was also a top issue, while ending COVID-19 was also there. The voters spoke in November and in Georgia in January. And it's time for the Congress to deliver what the people voted for and again pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Now more than ever, our nation is dealing with so many crises, but we can focus, we can walk, we can chew gum at the same time. And we're talking about life and death and the need to end the unjust killings of Black people. Our young people took to the streets almost longer than any other protests in history. They spoke. The world spoke. Everyone said it's time to act. So we implore the Congress to pass the Justice Floyd Policing Act. Take up your leadership and your service to the people and respond and vote for pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act now.
No entity, no individual, no person sworn to protect and uphold the law should operate above the law that they are being sworn and to protect. For many law enforcement officers across the country, they serve us well. They provide the necessary protections. But for African Americans, we have far too many individuals who take their oath of duty for granted because they know they have a special privilege under our law that they can operate above. And it has caused harm in our communities for far too long. Passage of this act will level the playing field of expectations so that our young people, if they're walking home from work, will not be harassed, that our young people driving while Black would not have a level of concern that currently exists in our community.
Support for the provisions of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act range from 74% who favor the banning of chokeholds to 91% who favor a requiring of body cameras for all civilian interactions. Every provision of the act, when tested, has supermajority support amongst the American people. It is not in doubt, and it could not be any clearer that the people of this nation want the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Americans voted for it, and Americans are demanding this kind of change. It should not have taken this long to achieve, and it's taken a long time. But we are appreciative of the members of the House who led this effort, Karen Bass and others, as well as the members of the House who stood up and voted for this bill as it passed the House of Representatives last year. It is time for action in 2021, and we demand such action.
This bill, in our judgment, is as important as the legislation that came out of the 60s civil rights movement. We've demonstrated all last summer, all over the country, culminating in the March on Washington, August 28th, where over 200,000 people peacefully marched, no arrests, no incidents. And we explicitly said, with the family of George Floyd there, the family of Breonna Taylor, the family of Ahmaud Arbery, all of the families there with us to lead the march with Martin Luther King III and I, that we wanted two things done: the George Floyd bill and the John Lewis voting bill. Of course, we also support H.R. 1. The Senate and Congress must stand and meet this moment like the Senate and Congress met the moment in the 60s. The Civil Rights Act resulted after a summer like last summer. The Voting Rights Act resulted after Selma. For the Senate and the Congress to miss this time to really deal with the issue of policing and deal with the issue of accountability. It is not anti-police any more than the Civil Rights Act was anti-white. It was about correcting those that acted wrongly and that behaved wrongly. The Voting Rights Act was not anti-Southerners. It was anti those that would deny the people the right to vote. The George Floyd bill is not an anti-police bill. It's an anti-bad policing, criminal policing bill. And this is the time and this is the place to do it. In a couple of weeks, we'll be going to Minneapolis for the jury selection of the police officer that lynched George Floyd with his knee. The family will have to sit there and relive this. I would hope that they would be able to sit there knowing that the laws have changed and that George was not lynched in vain, and that the Senate of 2021 has the same backbone and integrity that the Senate had in 1964. The times call for demonstration and legislation. this is the legislation that we need to see passed.
Joining me now with more on this is Melanie Campbell. She's the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. Thank you so much for joining me, Melanie. Now, let's start first with, why is it consequential that this bill be passed? Melanie, I'm going to have you stop for a second. We can't hear you. Melanie, you can start up again.
Okay. Thank you so much, and apologize for that. I think I was on mute.
No worries.
COVID life, right? But the reality is that that's what our people voted for. That's what we were in the streets for. Our young people are on the streets. It's not the only solution, but it is a very tangible bill that was passed last year and should have been passed by the Senate. But it was one of those bills that sat in former leader Mitch McConnell's office in the Senate. And so election happened. Folks voted, elected people who said they supported it. The Congress changed power. Black people showed up. Black women, black men, young people showed up. And so what we're saying is it's time to act on the things that people voted for. And when it comes to policing, criminal justice reform, it was the research that we did as well. We know from our Black Women's Roundtable Essence poll that issue has been, the issue of criminal justice and policing reform has been top 3 issue for the last 3 years. Election day, we did a poll. 4,600 Black people, young, old, everything in between. And that was still number 2 issue. So we know that, and so what we're doing and what we're elevating and supporting is that it's time to start. They've gotten past some of these things that were blocking. It's time to legislate, as Reverend Sharpton said. And that's one of those key issues that we need to move on, because it is a life or death issue. People are still getting killed out here unjustly, not by all police. We know that, but it's too many that are, and that we need to put the protections in place to protect our people from having, and especially our young people and our even children, from dying at some of those police who are bad actors and that know that they will have a day in court if they're not doing the right thing.
Melanie, like you're saying, this is life or death. But even if Congress were to pass this bill, do you really believe that it would prevent unjustified killings of unarmed African Americans, like in the case of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor? Well,
Breonna Taylor was a no-knock warrant, right? So if you didn't have a no-knock warrant, if you had, that's something that comes off as something that people law enforcement cannot do from a federal sense. Yes, right? And so the whole idea of accountability, police being held accountable, but to have the ability to say that you have immunity because you're a police officer, of course, gives people the notion that no matter what, I'll be okay because I have this protection. And nobody's above the law, including people who were sworn to protect. And so anything it's not going to solve all the problems, but surely we need more than something that, depending on what state you are in, or depending on what city you're in, you may be better protected than others, because it's happening in rural America, urban America, and it's been historic anyhow. Right? When it comes to why even, I don't want to go that far back, the history is what it is. Policing was started to make sure that we stayed enslaved, and the like. And so there's always been a challenge in the first place. When we were out here our predecessors in the 60s, marching in the 60s, they sent the police and the police dogs at us. And so here we are in 2021. It is so past time and to deal with. And so this is one of those things that was put on the books, and we just need to get it passed. Other things that need to be done, but there's no need and reason to wait.
Melanie, like you're saying, a lot of people would agree with you, right? It's 2021. We shouldn't still be having these conversations. We shouldn't still be talking about these issues, but yet here we are. So let's say that, or what do you think is the likelihood that Congress will pass this bill?
I'm cautiously optimistic that we will. The first thing that has to happen is to get it out of the House again. And then, of course, it moves to the Senate. And and then we'll cross that vision because we know they're two different bodies. But I think the first order of business is to get it out there. Congressional Black Caucus under Karen Bass, who had been leading that, along with Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, who's now the new chair of the CBC. They are moving that forward with CBC members and other progressives who support it, and get it out of the House again, so it can move over to the Senate, so it can end up on President Biden's desk for signature.
All right, Melanie, for those who may not be as hopeful as you are there talks or next steps that would take place if Congress were not to pass this act?
I think we need to be laser focused on getting this bill passed. I am not of the mindset to sit here and say, well, what if we don't? We've jumped so many hoops. Just the fact that we were able to vote in 2020. So if we know that's what we want, we have to go after it collectively, individually, speak up. I don't care if you're in a red state or a blue state or a purple state. We have to make the demands to make sure that things pass. I believe, and this is something that our organization believes, and that's that they need to be looking at how this whole idea of how they pass the bills and get rid of the filibuster, in my opinion. But that's Melanie's opinion, and the reason is that the whole idea that you have to have a 60-vote threshold on so many things, and we need action. The things that are impacting our communities, Black communities, brown communities, poor communities, those less fortunate in this country, there is need for bold changes to take place with George Floyd Justice and Policing, with voting rights reform, with this COVID-19. So much is impacting people's lives, and it is life or death issues that we're talking about, that we need the ability for things to take place and happen so that our communities can not just survive, but we can thrive.
And Melanie, as you've been saying, police officers also need to be held accountable in order for the George Floyds and Breonna Taylors, for these things to not occur in the future. Now, if anything, what have congressional members been saying about this bill?
Well, so to the Congressional Black Caucus members have been speaking up, and I believe they're about to move to actually put the bill back in motion. And so those are the conversations we had. I've not heard any conversation myself about anybody not supporting it at this point.
But do you know when that would happen, just to give us some perspective or timeline?
I think it's happening this week, I believe, but very soon.
Okay, we'll leave it right there. Thank you so much, Melanie Campbell.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, folks, back to that Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have, you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it. Please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.